Hi booktube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today I've got a bit of a random reading update for you with some of the things that I've been reading over the last few weeks since the beginning of October. So far it started off quite strong. I finished off one book that's been taking quite some time to get through, and I finished a few other things. Before I get into them, the last video I put up was a book haul where I've been gifted some books, and with some birthday money I have bought some books, and they're going to be some of the last books that you'll be seeing for a while that are coming in new. So I'm hoping not to buy any more books until March. But there's one book that I've been given for my birthday that I didn't show you. I sort of left it on a shelf and forgot about it. And it was one that was a really lovely surprise and I was really excited about. And it's The Invisible Child and the Fir Tree. So two Moomin stories by Tove Jansson. It's just a delightful little book. And it's also got, if I go to the back for you, it's got a Moomin gallery that's been put together by Philip Ardor. Ardor, I think is how you say it. And it's just going through some of the Moomin characters and their characteristics. So that was just something that I was really delighted to be given. It was really lovely. So on to the books I finished so far this month. The month began with me finishing the complete poems of Emily Dickinson. I'm fairly certain it was right at the beginning of October, within the first few days that I read this. So it was good. I've been reading this since, I don't know, May or June, I think. So it's been quite some time, but I've been really enjoying it. And it was, she's a poet who's been surprising me more and more. And whenever you think she's repeating herself, or you think you've sort of set a boundary for the kind of things that she's interested in and the kind of things she's going to write about, suddenly she does something else, something different that you weren't expecting. It's really fun and interesting, and I've been putting asterisks by many of the poems as well, so I can go back and see which one stood out the most. And then next up, the only book so far that I've read that's sort of purely a Victober book that actually sort of fits within the confines of the Victober reading event, and that's The Diary of Nobody by George and Weedon Grossmith. And it's essentially a satire of all of these diaries that were coming out in sort of the late Victorian period. Almost everybody was writing, was publishing their diaries in magazines, and so the sort of conceit of this is that just your average person is doing it as well. And it is just delightful. You can see the influence it's had on British humour, I think, and on British comedy. I think something like Fawlty Towers probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for this. And certainly, I think you can definitely see how P.G. Wodehouse was really inspired by this. And other than that, I don't really have much to say about it. It's hard to review it other than saying it's funny. The characters are, particularly our main character, I've forgotten his name, Mr. Pooter. He's just that classic, I think, British comedy figure who is a bit. He's not particularly ambitious. He's a little bumbling. Whenever he tries to do something or impress someone, it's going to go wrong. Very snobbish, very disapproving, and so sometimes you're thinking he's not necessarily someone you want to spend all that much time with. But it's only a small book, and there's only so many snobbish things you can say, and sort of generally within the world of the book, it is quite funny. So that's more or less all I can say. I enjoyed it, and it was quite often when I'm reading Victorian books, it's either sort of Victorian poetry, or it's a big Dickens novel, or something like that. It's a little more serious. It might have comic elements, but to read something that was just so light-hearted all the way through, I thought was really lovely, and it was just a different flavour. Then next up, this was really interesting. It's The Border by Erika Fatland. It's about the countries that share a border with Russia, and I really quite enjoyed it. There was a bit in the middle where I was feeling it was a bit repetitive, but I think something like this is bound to feel a bit repetitive since the country that she's walking around is so big, and there are so many countries it borders. Walking into yet another place and asking people, oh, what's it like to be so close to Russia? It's going to get repetitive very fast. And actually, she does a good job of sort of changing things up, and just the differences in culture and history as well do a lot to keeping it from feeling too repetitive. So it certainly did sustain my interest. But there's just so much in here that I didn't know, and so much in here that's sort of it's obvious, but it's just not the kind of thing you always think about. Like how between Norway and North Korea, there's only one country, and that's Russia, and it's a massive country. It's essentially a continent, or two continents, but still there's only one state between Norway and North Korea. And it was interesting to find. So she starts off the book with a voyage over the Northeast Passage, so sort of going over the top of Russia, and in a ship with loads of other sort of well-travelled people, and exploring or telling the history of a lot of these early explorations to the far east of what is now Russia, over into Alaska, what's now Alaska, and sort of over then sort of westward as well. And then after giving us a lot of that history and the account of her own journey, she then goes on to start in North Korea and then makes the way around. It was fascinating to see that you can actually go on holiday to North Korea. It doesn't sound like it would be a lot of fun, but I had no idea it was as open as that. But it doesn't sound like a particularly fun place to go on holiday. It's very prescriptive, would be the word I'd use. After that, the most intriguing part for me was Mongolia as well, and meeting up with sort of various sort of reindeer herders, and she receives a concert from a prestigious Mongolian throat singer, and it's really quite cool, and you sort of realise how important that culture has been to world history as well. And it just goes on and on. Again, I don't know how much to say about it. It got a lot more interesting, at least for me, or just sort of different, I suppose, interesting in a different way, once we were in Eastern Europe and then following the border sort of northward, particularly in places like Estonia, and particularly actually in Belarus. She meets with this old woman who was from a Jewish community, and had lived through the Second World War, and it's of her account of what the Germans were doing there, and it's horrifying and terrible, and I won't go into too much detail, but in its own way, it's kind of the highlight of the book. That was when the whole thing sort of felt most human and most down to earth, and the writing itself felt, it felt much more gripping at that point. And she finishes off at Norway. She makes her way north through, up to Estonia and to Finland, and then there's a little bit in the very north of Finland where Norway comes over the top and sort of meets Russia. I've heard that is the border. Being a Norwegian, the border her own country shares with Russia is perhaps the most important, and the one most worth investigating for her. So again, the book once again took a new lease of life at that point, as she was exploring that relationship. So that's The Border by Erika Fatland. It's a fairly chunky one, about 600 pages or so, but I in the end very much enjoyed it, and there's a lot to think about really. It was written, so the annexation of Crimea had happened a few years before, so that was very present, particularly when she was in Ukraine. But it was written well before the current invasion. So it's it's just sort of interesting to see how things were at that point, and sort of remembering how things were, because so much has happened since. And then the next two I finished. I wanted to read something from the 19th century to kind of engage with October, but to actually read something outside of Britain or Ireland. And I read The House of Ullua by Emilia, Pardo, Bazán. And my feelings about it were pretty mixed. It's the story of an old aristocratic family, and the House of Ola is in the middle of the I think it's the Galician countryside. So is that the northwest of Spain? Correct me if I'm wrong. And it's very ragged and dramatic, and it's sort of the country of wolves is, I think, how one of the characters describes it. And a priest, a Jesuit priest, has been sort of hired, has been given the job to be the chaplain at the House of Ullua, because the Marquis living there is apparently a libertine. He's uncouth. He's he needs a guiding hand in life, and it's about the chaplain's struggle to make a happy house out of this decaying sort of awful house. And on paper, the story is quite interesting. I loved the opening, that it's just so atmospheric. It kind of reminded me of the opening of Dracula, with this chaplain, or this priest on horseback going through this threatening countryside, and feeling totally out of his depth, and then arriving at this house where some pretty shameful stuff happens. It's sort of worth knowing that quite early on, it's not a happy place. The Marquis has had a son with one of the servants, and he treats both of them quite woefully, really. So there are moments where he's, he does physically abuse her, and he physically abuses the boy, or they're not. Yeah, I know we'll get into it, but it is quite, just get quite dark there, and there are other moments where that crops up again. And the kind of manager of the estate, the kind of second in command there, is the father of this servant, and so there's a really odd dynamic, and it sort of turns out that this this groundsman, this second in command, is essentially the guy running things. He's the guy who knows all the people in the surrounding community, who has all the connections, and who has all the political connections as well. And so there's increasingly, the Marquis is feeling threatened by him. And so even as a reader, as you're reading it, you're feeling quite conflicted, because you've seen how horrible this Marcus can be, but also seeing how horrible this second in command guy can be as well. And it should be added as well that he's there watching as all this horrible stuff is happening to his daughter and his grandson, and so he's not, he's not a particularly nice man either. So yeah, you're just not sure. I wasn't sure what to think. I wasn't sure how to feel. That there were parts of the book where I felt that the Marcus is being portrayed more as a kind of, a buffoon, a guy that if he only had a leading hand, he could be a decent chap, and yet then he does all this awful stuff as well. And so I just didn't know what to think of him. The kind of gothic, gloomy atmosphere from the opening chapters wasn't sustained at all. It sort of becomes a bit of a farce, a bit of a satire about provincial living, provincial politicians, and the clergy, and it just felt like this book didn't know exactly what it wanted to be, and the characters didn't feel settled to me either. And it seems like every now and then there'll be a new element of the story thrown up where Bazán was almost starting afresh, like, okay, this is going to be the main focus, and now this is going to be the main focus. And so I felt like I was being continually distracted as I was reading it. And so a bit of an odd one. It gets a bit more interesting towards the middle, where the Marcus gets married to one of his cousins. I did find the lead up to that quite intriguing, but then after that had all happened as well, it just lost all of its momentum all over again. So wasn't too sure. A good ending as well, I should add. I did really quite like the ending, but again, I'm just not sure what to think of it, and I'm not really sure what this book was trying to be. At times it was really gothic, at times it was really odd and farcical. There was no set tone, no set characterization as far as I could tell. And so a bit of an odd one. I'm glad I read it, but I don't think it'll be one that I'll be revisiting anytime soon. And then the next book I finished, I just wanted a short piece of non-fiction to sort of contrast some of the other things I've been reading. And I picked up What is Existentialism by Simone de Beauvoir. And it's made up of two essays. So we've got What is Existentialism, which is really just a short article for a newspaper. It's only about 7 pages long, and she spends about 3 to 4 pages complaining about the fact that, really the amount of time she has in this article is not nearly enough time to explain what existentialism is. And maybe if she hadn't have been complaining about how short this allotment of space was, maybe there would have been more space to actually explain what existentialism is. So I felt like it was a bit of a silly ploy. She does kind of get round to it a bit towards the end. But really the most interesting thing is the second essay, which is what takes up the most part of this book, which is Pyrrhus and Cineas. And the title, it's about the general Pyrrhus. It's taken from Plutarch, and I'll just read the first paragraph. Plutarch tells us that one day Pyrrhus was devising projects of conquest. "We are going to subjugate Greece first," he was saying. "And after that," said Cineas, we will vanquish Africa. After Africa, we will go on to Asia. We will conquer Asia Minor, Arabia. And after that, we will go on as far as India. After India? "Ah," said Pyrrhus, "I will rest." "Why not rest right away?" said Cineas. And so it's sort of going on to, that's essentially the sort of situation you find yourself in, or as seen from an existentialist sort of standpoint, that your life is a a kind of endless string of goals. And Cineas sounds wise when he says, why not rest now if that's going to be the goal right at the end of it? And yet when Pyrrhus does go to rest, he's not just going to be sitting around doing nothing. He's going to find something. He's going to find some other goal, something else to work towards. And so although it sounds wise to say, well, why not just rest now instead of going through all of this bother, we actually have to find these continual projects, and we have to live through them. And I just really loved it. It's sort of going through how we're free agents in the world, and then the whole second part of the essay is then, if you have this existentialist view of the world, often I think it can be very tempting to hold that kind of view, and it be very personal, and it's not necessarily isolating, but it's a way of seeing the world that's kind of all about you, because it's all about your own existence, and what you're going to do with this. And yet the whole second part of the essay is about other people and how this kind of worldview relates to other people, or how you might relate to other people, which was really, really intriguing. And it'll be something I'll come to again, and maybe I can give you a better idea of what it's about. But I really quite liked it, and I should probably go on and read some more Beauvoir at some point. But that's pretty much, that's everything that I've finished over the last 2 or 3 weeks since the beginning of October. I'll quickly show you what I have been reading. It feels like there's been a bit of a, not quite a psychodrama, but essentially I was feeling a little bit of a lack of motivation for reading after reading The House of Ullua. I felt I just wanted to read something that was a bit more in my wheelhouse. And on a whim, more or less, I decided to pick up, about just over a week ago, the Glass Bead game by Herman Hesse. It says on here that it's sublime, and actually I found I wasn't wasn't particularly enjoying it, and I was throwing up all of these objections, and I'm not sure whether that's because of the place I was coming from, having had read The House of Ola, or whether they really are objections. And then the more I'm reading this, the more Hess is throwing up all these other things that keep engaging me and keeps me interested. And so it's this really odd game it's like a game of tug of war between me and the book. But I'll sort of discuss what I think when I finally finished it. I'm just over halfway through, so it'll take me a while. But it's a really odd one, and I'll get into it later. So because I was reading that, I just wanted to read something fun, and so I found on my Kindle, I got loads of things for free that are in the public domain, and one of them was The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany, which was just perfect. This was the kind of read that I was looking for when I picked up the Glass Bead game, really. So it's been good to have that contrast between that and the Glass Bead game. And then I've also been reading The Wasteland very, very slowly with my friend Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics. So I've been looking at this. This is a facsimile of the original drafts. So we've got a facsimile there, and then a typescript. And it's been interesting to see how the poem develops, and to sort of slowly read each section. In the back, there's a we've got the text of the first printed edition, and so I'm sort of reading the finished poem as well, very slowly, just one part every week, and that's been really enjoyable. And I've been enjoying discussing the poem with him, because it's something that I every now and then I just dive really deep into the wasteland, and then a few months pass and I've sort of forgotten almost everything. And so it's always good to refresh my memory and to find new things. So that's been a lot of fun. So that's been my month in reading so far. I'm hoping to, in the next few days, do the end of the year book tag. It's started popping up since we're firmly in the last quarter of the year. So although I haven't been tagged in it, it's not always the kind of tag that you need to be tagged in to do. I feel like that's probably the next thing that I'll try to do. And I might try to do a Poetry Thursday as well. So for now, I think that's everything. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you've had a lovely weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.